Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for our first episode of Barry Law Firm Live. Not without some little technical difficulties for the first time, but this is a pretty awesome opportunity to get to talk about veterans benefits. I'm Seth Chambers, I'm an employee and a veteran here at Barry Law Firm, and with me today is Jerusha Hancock, our lead attorney. Today we'd like to talk about do I qualify for multiple service-connected disabilities? How would we like to start this conversation?
Well, let's start with pyramiding, because I think a lot of people have questions about when they have different disabilities or the doctors diagnosed them with a variety of different things, whether they can get distinct ratings for each disability, and that will depend.
Yeah, we do get a lot of questions about veterans will ask, why is it that I can get a rating for, say, depression and PTSD and anxiety, but then when they give me my overall rating, they reduce the number of my evaluation. I don't understand why I can be rated for all of them or not rated for all of them. I mean, in your experience, what have you seen about that?
So veterans can get separate ratings for distinct disabling conditions. So if it's the same general body part or it's the same bodily system, a lot of times you can't get separate ratings for that. A really good example is in the mental health area. So you can have a mental health condition even if you're diagnosed with multiple conditions. One good example of this would be if you have a diagnosis for PTSD and then you have a separate diagnosis for depression. If both are considered service-connected, then you're going to get one evaluation that takes into consideration all of your symptoms.
Right.
But say you have service connection for PTSD, but your depression is considered related to something that's not service connected. They'll try as much as they can to separate out those symptoms and only compensate you for the PTSD.
Right. So let me repeat what I've understood that you said, which is if you have a diagnosis of PTSD, but you're also trying to claim depression in related to your PTSD, they will combine those ratings because they're the same. But if you said, I have PTSD and I have, for example, maybe knee pains, and the knee pains prevent me from working out, and maybe I'm gaining weight, and now I'm depressed because my lifestyle isn't the same, they may give you another rating for depression because the depression is not related to the PTSD. Did I understand that correctly?
Basically. So they will, if your depression is considered service connected or related to service, then you'll still only get one rating for a mental health condition, but they'll take your depressive symptoms into consideration when setting that rating. If your depression is considered related to something that's not service connected or not related to your time in service, then they will try to separate those symptoms out, so they're only compensating you for your PTSD symptoms.
Right, and that could be why it has an effect on your overall rating too, which is why you may not get an increase in the overall rating otherwise.
Correct.
Right? Okay,
Correct.
Great. That's awesome.
So another area where we see this a lot is with gastrointestinal problems. So the rating code actually specifies which diagnostic codes, which is the code that they assign to each disability, which diagnostic codes can be considered separate ratings and which cannot. So if you, say, have both gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD, as most people call it, and you have irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, you're only going to get one rating for the gastrointestinal condition. You can't get separate ratings, and that's because they consider it to affect the same bodily system, and it's not distinct enough to get separate evaluations.
Which kind of goes back to what we were talking about with pyramiding, which is why they don't allow that.
Right. You can't double dip, basically.
Right.
You can't get compensated twice for the same thing. On the other hand, if it's considered distinct, then you can get multiple ratings for the same problem. So, for example, you have a knee condition, and you go in for your compensation and pension examination, and the examiner finds out that you have a limitation of extension, so how far can you push your knee out, flexion, so how far can you pull it in, and then maybe you have some instability in the joint too, so your knee buckles or gives way on occasion. Each one of those is considered distinct, so you could get 10% for limitation of flexion, 10% for extension, 10% for instability, and all of those would be considered separate ratings that would feed into your combined total evaluation.
Right, which then does, as you stated, when you start combining those with other disabilities, how that increases the entire total disability rating.
Correct.
So when some people have multiple musculoskeletal claims, but not any claims that, like you said, are gastrointestinal or mental health, how the rating can sometimes just stop. Like it'll get up to 60% and they keep claiming more musculoskeletal, and then it doesn't go much higher than that because it's all related, or am I off base on that a little bit?
A little bit. You can still get separate ratings, but once you get to a certain point, it takes a lot to get from 60 to 70 or 70 to 80, and that's because of the way the VA calculates the combined total disability. So, for example, if you're 50% for PTSD, 50% of 100 is, of course, 50%. But then if you add 10%, 10% of 50%, and then you add those together, and then so each additional disability is that percentage of what your combined total is. So the higher you go, the harder it is to get to the next level.
Yeah. Okay. So at the lower levels, 10 and 10 and 10 could equal 30, but
Yes.
at the higher level, 10 and 10 and 10 on top of 90 is still 90.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly.
Let's see. What else do we want to talk? Do we want to talk about the bilateral factor of a disability?
Right. So a bilateral factor can really help you out getting from, say, 50% to 60% when you have when both limbs are affected. So, for example, maybe you have a neck condition and that causes radiculopathy, which is the numbness and tingling down the arms. And you get 10% for each arm for the radiculopathy. A bilateral factor means that you have essentially parallel disabilities, and they will add on an additional 1.9%. So that might bump you up a little bit. And with every parallel disability, so both knees, both ankles, both elbows, whatever it happens to be, they will add on an additional 1.9%. And so if you've got parallel disabilities, that really can help you get up to that next level.
Right. And is parallel disabilities the same thing as filing something as secondary? So like if someone says, I injured my right shoulder in service, so therefore I don't use my right shoulder, I have to use my left shoulder to do everything. Now my left shoulder is completely shot because I have to overuse it. Is that similar? Is that different? Let's clarify that because of the bilateral part.
It's a little different. One, you're talking about service connection. If you injured your right shoulder in service and then you overused your left shoulder, you're claiming the theory of service connection there is that your bum right shoulder caused your bum left shoulder.
Right.
And
exactly.
maybe the VA agrees with you. If the VA does agree with you and service connects both shoulders, then that's the bilateral factor. And then it's an additional 1.9% that may bump you up from 70% to, say, 80%.
Right. Great. So let's talk about using pain as a disability.
So pain as a disability is a very recent development in VA law. Up until, I want to say September of this year, actually, pain was not considered a disability, which kind of seems ridiculous when you think about it.
Right.
I mean, if you've got pain, obviously, you're probably going to be limited in the things that you can do. So with a recent court case in Saunders v. Wilkie, the court decided that pain is actually a compensable disability, even if you don't have a diagnosis. So say you go in and you're claiming a knee condition, and while you were in service your knee started hurting and it kind of started swelling sometimes and you might have some flare-ups. Well, in the past you might go in and they'd x-ray your knee and there wouldn't be any sign of arthritis or any other kind of condition. The doctor might say, well, I get that your knee hurts, but there's no diagnosis I can give you for it. There's no reason that it hurts. And then they would use that to deny your claim for service connection. Now you can go in, you can say, my knee hurts, and the doctor might not be able to tell you why. But if you can show that you have functional limitations, there are things you can't do because of the pain in your knee, you can still get service connected.
So what are some of the things, I mean, with something as broad as, hey, I have pain, what are the slippery slopes of that we might see where veteran claims that they have pain, the VA keeps denying, they keep saying it's painful? Like, what things can the veteran do to help their case to prove that they have pain? Like, what would we need here to help them prove that they have pain, just besides them coming up with a statement that says, I have pain, which is such a vague thing to just help prove?
Well, pain is really subjective, and nobody can tell you that you don't have pain or that your pain isn't severe. But if you can show that there are things that you don't do anymore because of your pain, like maybe you like to go hunting or fishing, then you can show that you don't do those activities anymore because it hurts too much. Or maybe your spouse can talk about the things that you no longer do. Like maybe you can't mow the yard anymore and your wife has to do it. Or maybe you could keep a pain journal and talk about when you have pain and what triggers it and what the level is. And I've got a comment. So hi, Ruben. Glad to see you. So there are things you can do to show that you have a functional loss, because that's really the key. You can have pain and no functional loss and you won't be compensated.
Right.
But pain with functional loss, and you can. So you really are probably going to want to concentrate on what functional loss do you experience. What are the things that you can't do? What are the activities of daily living that you don't do anymore that you have to have help with? That's what's going to help you out with service connection.
So understanding that would be, it's not just enough to say that you have pain, because as you said, that's subjective. What you would need to do if you wanted to get service connected or a compensable rating for service connection is that next step, which is you need to be able to explain to the VA that because of this, or how it started or when it started, but or you feel that it's because of your service, now you cannot do X, Y, and Z, a statement from either a spouse or someone else, even a buddy statement saying we used to go hunting all the time and now he doesn't, or he used to complain of knee pains and that's why, as things have gone on. Any kind of tracking like that helps, which really brings up another good point, which is the VA just usually needs some kind of corroborating evidence to help them do the claims that are not successful, and I would assume that you would see this, are ones where veteran makes a statement about a disability but has a weak time getting it back to something. They just say that I was in the service and I didn't have this before the service, and now I'm after the service and I have this, which is really hard for us to do. So evidence that walks those breadcrumbs back to the original event in service or something from your service will help.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Have we had any comments, any questions from anyone about things that they would like to talk about?
Well, let's talk. I think the last one we probably want to talk about today is when you would want to claim multiple disabilities as one and when you wouldn't want to, because this is where your TDIU, IU, it's referred to as both. It's basically if you are not at scheduler 100%, your rating is somewhere under 100%, but you are unable to work because of your service-connected disabilities, when will the VA pay you as though you are completely disabled? And that's where that individual unemployability or TDIU or whatever you want to call it comes in.
Right.
So The key thing to remember is for a grant of TDIU, you need one disability rated at 60% or more, um, or multiple disabilities with at least one at 40 and a combined total of 70 in order to be statutorily eligible for IU. And that just means that the VA is required to look at your disabilities and whether or not they think that you can work. So the question is, when is it advantageous to claim TDIU based on a single disability? And this is really where we see an increased monthly payments, and that is when you have a single disability that prevents you from working. You can get what's called special monthly compensation at the housebound rate. And all that means is you have one disability rated at 100% and other disabilities rated at 60% or more, and that will get you additional payments every month. Where this can get tricky is if you have multiple disabilities, and the VA could rate you as completely disabled on the basis of multiple disabilities or a single disability. And where we see this most often is with mental health conditions. So if you've got 70% for PTSD, it's going to be advantageous to the veteran in order to say that the mental health condition alone prevents me from working, because that will get you to 100% with that one condition. And then if you have other conditions rated at 60% or more, that gets you the special monthly compensation.
Okay, so if I understood that piece correctly, so if you have disabilities that prevent you from working, the first step is you have to meet the VA's scheduler rating for it. So like for example, myself, I'm rated at 60% for wrist surgery, neck, and a couple other things. But I do not qualify for unemployability because my total disability is 60%, not 70, and I don't have one disability rated at 40. So you have to make one of those two avenues. One disability has to be at 60, or one has to be at 40 with the entire disability rating at 70.
Correct.
Then if you do meet that, say you have the disability is 60% for PTSD and that's all you have, and it's not enough, the PTSD is not enough for it in and of itself to get to 100%, but because you have a hard time functioning within society or holding a job, which a lot of veterans do with PTSD, and you're financially burdened because of that, a lot of veterans may not know you can file for individual unemployability based on that disability, which will bridge the gap financially between the 100% rate and the 60% rate that you currently have, which means you'll be rated at 60% but paid at the 100% if granted TDIU.
Correct.
And then if you had the other thing, which is the special monthly compensation, which is above and beyond that, if you were already at 100% for PTSD, you could then, if you had other disabilities, say if your back was at 60 or something else,
right,
you could get more because you have done what they call 100 plus 60.
Exactly. So, for example, I had a client who had to take early retirement from her position because of her PTSD. She had other conditions that were with a combined total of 60% or more. At first, the VA just wanted to consider IU or unemployability on the basis of all of her conditions. And we successfully argued that she was completely disabled because of her PTSD. And so that alone should be considered completely disabling, which then led to her being granted special monthly compensation.
Right.
So that's when it becomes advantageous to claim complete disability based on a single disability.
Yeah, and that's just something. I mean, it's difficult enough for some veterans to just be able to maneuver around the how do I file a claim, let alone knowing the complicated differences between special monthly compensation and IU and why you should try to get one disability above another. I mean, just a lot of things to to go through.
And we could probably do an entire episode on individual unemployability, and we probably will in the future.
Right.
But that's just a taste of when it's going to be really advantageous to claim a single disability resulting in unemployability. Most of the time, though, if you have multiple disabilities, the VA is going to look at all of them as a combined factor in whether or not you're able to work.
Yeah. Well, I think that was great. I think this has been really successful. I'm really glad we had the opportunity to come in and talk about this. There's so many things. It definitely helps to talk it out. If there's any questions for your next video, please put them in the comments below. Do you have any final statements or?
No, but I hope everybody has a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Yep, I would definitely wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, and we hope to see you again on the next Barry Law Firm Live.